Where's your attorney, son?
I don't have one, Your Honor.
Sit down, kid. This isn't a school project.
My mother didn't do this. I can prove it.
Your Honor, I move we skip the theatrics. The state has already proven its case.
Theatrics? You call the truth theatrics?
Watch your tone.
I'm sorry, sir, but nobody's watched anything in this case. Not really.
Kid, we have security footage, 3 witnesses, and a signed statement. What exactly do you have?
I have the one thing nobody bothered to check.
Chief Justice, this is unexpected.
Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever believed one small detail could save someone you love? If yes, subscribe now, because what happened to that kid and whoever came through the courtroom door will leave you speechless.
The apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a building that groaned every time the wind picked up. But it was home, and it smelled like fried plantain, cheap vanilla candles, and the particular warmth that only exists in places where love outweighs money. The boy was 7 when the story really begins, small for his age, with a habit of asking questions that made adults pause before answering. His mother worked 2 jobs, mornings at a laundromat, where the machines rattled loud enough to drown out her own thoughts, and evenings cleaning offices downtown, buildings so tall he used to press his face against the car window just to see where the top disappeared into the sky. One day, she told him once, gripping the steering wheel of their old car that coughed more than it drove, "You're going to work in one of those buildings, not cleaning them, owning a floor of one." He laughed, the kind of laugh only children have, unfiltered and easy. Which floor? The floor with the best view, obviously. What if I don't want a floor? What if I want the whole building? She glanced at him, amused, proud in that quiet way she always was. Then you'll get the whole building. That was the thing about her. She never told him to dream small, even when their reality was small, even when the lights flickered because the bill was paid a few days late, even when dinner some nights was just rice and whatever sauce could stretch the furthest. She made sure he never once felt poor in spirit. His father was a name mentioned rarely, and only in passing. A man who left when the boy was too young to remember his face clearly, chasing a career that apparently mattered more than staying. She never spoke badly of him. She simply spoke of him less and less, until his absence became just another piece of furniture in their lives, something you learned to walk around without thinking about it anymore. "Do you miss him?" the boy asked one night, maybe 8 years old, lying on the couch while she folded laundry beside him. She paused, a shirt half folded in her hands. "I miss who I thought he was." That's a weird answer. It's the only honest one I have. He sat with that for a moment, the way he sat with most things, quietly turning it over in his mind before responding. "I don't need him. I have you." She smiled, but her eyes glistened just slightly. "You say that now. I'll say it always." She leaned over and kissed his forehead, breathing him in like she was trying to memorize the moment. "You're going to be a good man. I can already tell." "How?" "Because you notice things other people don't. That's rare." It was true. Even as a small child, he had a habit of catching details that slipped past everyone else. The neighbor who always paused a second too long before saying hello. The bus driver who counted his change twice, even when it was always correct. The way his mother hummed old songs, only when she was trying not to cry. "Mama, why do you always hum when you're stressed?" She laughed softly, wiping flour from her hands as she moved around their tiny kitchen, the radio playing low in the background. "Because humming is cheaper than crying." He looked up at her, serious in that particular way only children can be, unaware of how heavy his words sometimes landed. You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. She paused at that, just for a second, her hands stilling over the bowl of batter. Then she walked over and kissed the top of his head. And you don't have to grow up so fast. Eat your food. But he noticed. He always noticed. The way she rubbed her temples after long shifts. The way she checked the mailbox with a flicker of anxiety before smiling and telling him everything was fine. The way she sometimes stared at old photographs of her own mother, long past, whispering things too quiet for him to hear. "Tell me about your mother," he asked one evening, the two of them sharing a blanket on the couch, an old movie playing that neither of them was really watching. "She was tough, tougher than me." "Tougher than you?" "Impossible." She laughed, nudging him. "She used to say something I never forgot." "What?" She said, "The world will try to convince you that quiet people don't notice anything. Let them believe that. It's your advantage." The boy went quiet, absorbing that the way he absorbed most things that mattered to him, filing it away somewhere deep, somewhere it would resurface later when he needed it most. "I think I understand that," he said finally. "You will, more than you know." Life continued in its small, steady rhythm. School during the day, homework at the kitchen table while she cooked, weekends spent doing whatever cost nothing, walks in the park, library visits where he'd disappear for hours into books far above his reading level, simply because the librarian never stopped him, and he liked feeling like the world had more in it than their apartment walls. There was a particular evening, one that would later feel important in ways neither of them understood yet, when she sat him down after dinner, her expression softer than usual, almost hesitant. "I need you to promise me something. Okay? If anything ever happens to me, anything at all, you don't panic. You think. You look for the truth, even when it's hiding. Can you promise me that?" He frowned, confused by the sudden seriousness. "Why would something happen to you?" "It probably won't. I just need to know you'd be okay." "I'd be more than okay. I'd fight for you." Something flickered across her face, pride mixed with something heavier, something like fear she was trying not to show him. "That's exactly what worries me." "Why?" "Because the world doesn't always reward people who fight for the truth. Sometimes it punishes them." "Then I'll fight anyway." She pulled him into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the breath out of him, holding on longer than usual, like she was trying to store the moment somewhere safe. "Promise me you'll be careful too," she whispered. "I promise." Neither of them could have known how soon that promise would be tested. The weeks that followed felt ordinary on the surface. School, homework, small routines that made up the architecture of their life together. But there were signs, small ones, the kind only a boy who noticed everything would catch. His mother, taking calls in hushed tones on the balcony, her voice tight with something she never fully explained. A folder of papers she kept locked in a drawer, one she quickly closed whenever he walked into the room. The way she started glancing at the door more often, as if expecting someone, or perhaps afraid of someone. "Everything okay, Mama?" "Everything's fine, baby. Just adult stuff." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." But it wasn't always true, and somewhere in his gut, in that quiet, observant part of him that noticed things others didn't, he knew it. One evening, close to midnight, he woke to find her sitting alone at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, her head in her hands. He stood in the doorway, watching silently for a moment before speaking. "Mama?" She looked up quickly, wiping her face, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You should be asleep. So should you." She sighed, gesturing for him to sit beside her. He climbed into the chair, studying the papers scattered across the table, words too complicated for him to fully understand yet. But the tension in the room was something he understood perfectly. Are you in trouble? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Someone is trying to make it look like I did something I didn't do. Then we prove them wrong. She smiled, a small, tired, grateful smile. It's not that simple. Why not? Because sometimes the truth needs more than good intentions. It needs proof, and proof isn't always easy to find. He sat with that for a long moment, his young mind working the way it always did, quietly, carefully, absorbing every word like it mattered more than she realized. Then I'll help you find it. You're 8 years old. You said, quiet people notice things others don't. That's my advantage, remember? She laughed softly. Through tears, she didn't bother hiding this time, pulling him into her side. You remembered that. I remember everything you tell me. They sat together at that table long after midnight, her hand resting over his, the weight of something neither of them could yet name settling quietly into the room. The next morning, everything would change. The morning began like any other. The smell of tea instead of coffee, because coffee had become too expensive to buy regularly, sunlight slipping weakly through the kitchen blinds, the boy half asleep at the table, while his mother moved around packing his lunch with the same care she always did, even on days she looked like she hadn't slept at all. Then came the knock. Not the soft, familiar knock of a neighbor. Firm, deliberate. The kind of knock that made his mother's hands still mid-motion, the butter knife pausing over his sandwich. Stay here, she said quietly. He didn't listen. He never did when it mattered. He followed a few steps behind as she opened the door, and standing there were 2 officers, expressions unreadable, official in a way that made the hallway feel smaller than it actually was. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. For what? Her voice remained calm, but he saw her fingers tighten around the doorframe. You'll be informed at the station. The boy stepped forward before he could stop himself. What's going on? One of the officers glanced at him, then back at his mother. Is there someone who can watch him? He's fine here. I'll call his aunt. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the first sign of fear she allowed herself to show. Mama? She turned to him quickly, crouching down despite the officers waiting, cupping his face in her hands like she was trying to seal the moment somewhere safe. Listen to me. This is a mistake. I'll be home before dinner. Promise? She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. I promise I'll fight to come home. That wasn't the same thing, and somewhere deep down, he understood that even then. She wasn't home before dinner. She wasn't home the next day either. His aunt arrived within the hour, a kind but overwhelmed woman who worked long shifts of her own and clearly hadn't planned on suddenly caring for a child indefinitely. She did her best, but her best came with exhaustion in her eyes and a phone constantly pressed to her ear, trying to piece together what exactly had happened. They're saying she committed fraud, his aunt explained one evening, voice hushed, like she thought he couldn't hear from the next room. Something about missing funds where she used to work. It doesn't make sense. She barely had 2 coins to rub together. The boy sat on the stairs, knees pulled to his chest, listening to every word. The trial moved faster than anyone expected, faster than felt right. A signed statement from a former coworker, presented with confidence. A blurry security clip that supposedly placed her at the scene during a transaction she swore she never made. A lawyer assigned to her case who kept glancing at his watch during meetings, distracted, overworked, clearly juggling far too many cases to give hers the attention it needed. The boy attended every single hearing, small and quiet in the front row, hands folded in his lap, the way his mother taught him to sit when he needed to think clearly. He didn't understand every word exchanged in that courtroom, legal terms too complicated for someone his age, but he understood the tone, He understood the way the prosecutor smiled a little too easily. He understood the way his mother's shoulders grew smaller with each passing day. "You don't have to come every day," she told him once, during a recess, reaching for his hand across the small table they were allowed to share for a few minutes. "Yes, I do. This isn't a place for children. You're here, so I'll keep coming." Her eyes softened, glistening slightly, before she blinked it away, refusing to let herself fall apart in front of him. "I don't want this to be your normal. It won't be, because we're going to fix it." She squeezed his hand. "I love how much you believe that." "I don't just believe it, I know it." The word landed on the final day of the trial, like something physical, heavy, suffocating, impossible to fully process, even as it echoed through the room. Guilty. His mother didn't cry in front of the courtroom. She sat perfectly still, spine straight, chin lifted, as if refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her break. But he saw it, the almost invisible tremble in her hands, the way her breath caught before she steadied it, the way she glanced back at him, just once, an apology written across her face for something that wasn't her fault. She was sentenced to 5 years. The ride home from the courthouse that day was silent, his aunt gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, unsure of what to say to a 9-year-old whose entire world had just been rearranged in the span of an afternoon. "It'll be okay," she finally offered, weak and unconvincing even to her own ears. He didn't respond. He simply stared out the window, watching the city blur past, replaying every moment of the trial in his mind, searching for the piece that didn't fit. Because something didn't fit. He just didn't know what yet. The visits began the following week, thick glass separating them, a phone pressed to each of their ears, the sterile smell of the visiting room, nothing like the warmth of their old kitchen. "You have to stop coming here," she told him, during one of their early visits, her voice tired in a way he had never heard before. "This isn't a place for you. You're in here, so I'll keep coming." She reached for his hand, pressing her palm flat against the glass, an old habit that had become their version of holding hands. "I don't want you spending your childhood in visiting rooms." "I'm not spending it here," he said softly, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm spending it figuring out how to get you out." That's a big promise for a 9-year-old. "You said I notice things other people miss. That's my advantage, remember." Something shifted in her expression, pride breaking through the exhaustion, if only for a moment. "I remember. Then trust me." "I do," she whispered. "I always have." That night, back at his aunt's cramped apartment, he pulled out every piece of paper he had, notes he'd taken during the trial, scraps of testimony he half understood, names of witnesses he didn't recognize but felt were somehow important. He spread them across the small desk in the corner of his room and began reading, slowly, carefully, like each page held a fragment of her freedom hidden somewhere between the lines. He didn't fully understand legal language yet, but he understood patterns. He understood inconsistency, and somewhere in his gut, that same quiet, observant instinct his mother always praised told him something in that trial hadn't added up. "You're going to strain your eyes reading in this light," came a voice from the doorway one evening a few weeks later. He looked up to find the old man who lived 2 floors down, someone he vaguely recognized from the building's hallways, someone who always nodded politely but never said much beyond that. "I don't have anywhere else to read it." The man stepped inside, glancing at the scattered papers with an expression that shifted from curiosity to something more serious. "What exactly are you looking for?" Something everyone missed. The old man studied him for a long moment, the kind of look adults give children when they're deciding whether to take them seriously. Then he sighed, pulling a chair over and sitting beside him. I used to be a paralegal, retired now. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but, he tapped his temple, this still works fine. Can you help me? That depends. Are you looking for comfort, or are you looking for truth? Because those are two very different things. The boy met his eyes without hesitation. Truth. The old man nodded slowly, something like respect settling into his features. Then we start with the timestamps. Always start with the timestamps. Week after week, they sat together at that small desk, the old man teaching him how to read a case file properly, how to notice when dates didn't align, how silence in a document could be louder than the words written on it, how the absence of a detail was sometimes more important than its presence. Most people read documents to find what's there, the old man told him one evening. Smart people read documents to find what's missing. The boy absorbed every lesson like it was oxygen, staying up long after he should have been asleep, poring over photocopies his aunt had reluctantly requested from the court, cross-referencing timelines, building a picture piece by piece. His mother noticed the change in him during visits, the sharper focus in his eyes, the way he started asking more specific questions. "You're planning something," she said one afternoon, studying him carefully through the glass. "Maybe. Be careful. Please. I promised you I would. I know. She paused, pressing her palm against the glass again. "I don't want you carrying this. This isn't your burden." "It's not a burden," he said quietly. "It's a promise." She didn't argue after that. She simply nodded, blinking back tears, watching her son grow into someone far beyond his years, right in front of her, in the worst possible circumstances imaginable. Months passed this way. Visits, research, quiet nights spent hunched over paperwork, with a man who had become an unlikely mentor. And then, one night, past midnight, surrounded by scattered documents under a single desk lamp, he found it. A single line buried within a report, a timestamp that placed his mother somewhere she couldn't possibly have been during the exact window the prosecution claimed she committed the crime. His hands went still. He read it again, then again, making sure his eyes weren't deceiving him, making sure this wasn't simply what he desperately wanted to see. It wasn't. "Mama," he whispered to the empty room, voice trembling. "I found it." He didn't sleep that night. He simply sat there, staring at the paper, like it might vanish if he looked away for even a second, like the truth itself was fragile enough to disappear if he didn't hold on to it tightly enough. By morning, he knew exactly what he had to do. The old man's kitchen smelled like strong tea and old paper, a combination the boy had grown to associate with hope. He arrived at dawn, still in his pajama shirt, the folder clutched against his chest like something precious. "I found it," he said, breathless, setting the paper down on the table between them. The old man adjusted his glasses, studying the page carefully, his expression unreadable at first. He read it once, then again, slower this time, his finger tracing the line the boy had circled in pencil. Where did this come from? The security company's internal log. It was in the folder my aunt requested, buried behind pages nobody probably ever looked at twice. The old man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Do you understand what this means?" "It means the footage they used against her doesn't match this timestamp. It means she couldn't have been where they said she was. It means," the old man said carefully, "that either someone made a mistake or someone made sure this particular page never made it into the courtroom." The boy's stomach tightened. "Someone hid it on purpose?" "I don't know yet, but cases don't usually get built this cleanly, unless someone wanted them to look airtight." He tapped the page again. "This is a start, not an ending. You understand the difference?" "I understand it's not enough yet." "Good. Because proving a mistake exists is one thing, proving why it exists, and getting anyone in power to care, that's another fight entirely. The boy nodded, jaw set with a determination that looked strange on such a young face, like watching someone carry weight they were never meant to carry alone. Then, let's find the why. They worked for weeks after that, evenings spent poring over files, the old man teaching him how to file formal requests for additional records, how to write letters that sounded official enough to be taken seriously, how to be patient, even when patience felt unbearable. His aunt, though tired and stretched thin trying to manage her own life alongside raising him unexpectedly, began to notice the shift in him. The quiet 10-year-old who used to disappear into books now disappeared into case files instead, his focus unwavering. "You're going to burn yourself out," she told him one evening, setting a plate of food in front of him that he barely touched. "I can't stop now. I know. I just worry about you. Worry about her instead. She's the one still in there." His aunt sighed, sitting across from him, studying his face carefully. "You know, your mother used to be like this too, relentless. When she believed in something, nothing could shake her. She still is like that," he said quietly. "She's just stuck somewhere that doesn't let her prove it. Then I suppose it's a good thing she raised someone who can prove it for her." He managed a small, tired smile at that, the first genuine one his aunt had seen from him in weeks. The next visit with his mother felt different. He sat across from her, phone pressed to his ear, and instead of simply reassuring her the way he usually did, he told her everything. The timestamp, the old man's help, the requests for additional records now sitting with a court clerk's office, waiting to be processed. She listened in silence, her eyes glistening more with every detail, until finally she pressed her hand against the glass, voice barely above a whisper. "You actually found something. I told you I would. I know you did. She laughed softly through tears. "I didn't expect you to actually do it." "Why not?" "Because most people say things like that to make themselves feel better. I didn't realize you meant it as a plan. I don't say things I don't mean." She studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, pride tangled with disbelief, and a fragile, cautious hope she was almost afraid to fully feel. "Be careful," she finally said. "If someone hid that timestamp on purpose, that means someone doesn't want it found. People like that don't always play fair." "I'm not trying to play fair, I'm trying to win." Her breath caught slightly at that, hearing her own words echoed back at her, words she'd told him long before any of this began. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." The following weeks tested his patience in ways he hadn't expected. Requests for additional evidence moved slowly through the system, buried under bureaucracy that didn't care how urgent it felt to a 10-year-old boy fighting for his mother's freedom. Letters went unanswered. Calls were redirected. Doors that should have opened easily remained frustratingly shut. "This is normal," the old man reassured him, one particularly discouraging evening, after yet another request had been denied without explanation. "The system isn't built for urgency. It's built for process. You have to learn to work within it, without losing yourself to the frustration." "How do I do that when every day she's still in there?" You remind yourself that patience isn't the same as giving up. It's simply refusing to quit quietly. The boy sat with that, staring at the stack of unanswered letters on the table, feeling the weight of it pressing against his small shoulders. What if it's not enough? What if I do everything right and it still isn't enough? The old man reached over, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Then you'll know you tried everything within your power. And sometimes, that's the only thing you can control." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was honest, and somehow, that honesty steadied him more than empty reassurance would have. A turning point came unexpectedly, weeks later, through someone he hadn't anticipated. A woman who had worked briefly alongside his mother years earlier. Someone who had seen the boy's letters circulating through official channels and recognized the case immediately. She arrived at their door one evening, nervous, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly once inside, "but I saw your letters. I worked with her before all this happened. I know she wouldn't have done what they said. Do you know something?" the boy asked, heart pounding. The woman hesitated, wringing her hands. "I know the timestamps on the internal logs were adjusted around the time the investigation started. I saw it happen. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Now I do. Would you testify to that?" Her eyes widened slightly, fear flickering across her face. "That could cost me my job, maybe more. It could save my mother's life." The woman was silent for a long moment, torn between fear and conscience. The same battle so many people faced when truth demanded a price they weren't sure they were willing to pay. "I need to think about it," she finally said. "Please," the boy said, voice breaking slightly for the first time through all of this. "Please, just think about it." She left without a promise, and for days afterward, the boy carried the uncertainty like a stone in his chest, unsure if her conscience would win out over her fear. Then, one evening, nearly 2 weeks later, a knock came at the door. The woman stood there again, this time with a folder of her own, clutched tightly against her chest, her expression resolved. "I'll testify," she said simply. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." Relief flooded through him so intensely, he had to steady himself against the doorframe. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," she said. "This is going to be difficult. People who benefit from this staying buried won't be happy about it surfacing. I don't care about difficult. I care about getting her out." The old man, standing quietly behind him, placed a steady hand on his shoulder once more. "Then it's time we requested a new hearing." The process of securing a new hearing was its own battle entirely, filled with resistance from a system reluctant to admit its own mistakes. But armed now with a corroborated timestamp, a willing witness, and a case built meticulously over months of sleepless nights, the request finally succeeded. A new hearing was granted. The night before, the boy sat across from his mother during their final visit before the hearing. Both of them quieter than usual, the weight of what was coming settling heavily between them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I need you to know how proud I am of you, not just for what you found, for who you became while finding it. I just wanted you home. I know. But look at what that wanting turned you into." She pressed her palm against the glass, and for the first time in months, he pressed his back without hesitation, matching her hand exactly. "You didn't just fight for me. You became someone extraordinary while doing it." "I had a good teacher," he said, voice thick with emotion he'd been holding back for far too long. "You taught me to notice things. Everything after that was just me listening." She smiled through tears she no longer bothered hiding. "Tomorrow, we find out if it was enough." "It will be," he said, steadier now than he'd felt in months. "Because we didn't just find the truth. We're about to make sure everyone else sees it too." The morning of the hearing arrived gray and quiet, the kind of stillness that felt heavier than any storm. The boy stood outside the courthouse steps in a suit 2 sizes too big, borrowed from a cousin, sleeves rolled at the wrist so his hands could still move freely. His aunt straightened his collar with trembling fingers. "You don't have to be the one to speak," she reminded him gently. "The lawyer we found will handle most of it." "I know, but I want to be there. She needs to see me when it happens." His aunt studied him, something between worry and awe in her eyes. "You've grown up so fast." "I didn't have a choice." Inside, The courtroom felt different from the one that had convicted his mother nearly a year earlier. Same wood paneling, same tired fluorescent lighting, but something in the air had shifted, charged with the possibility of undoing what had already been done. His mother was led in, thinner than he remembered, but her spine straight, chin lifted the same way it had been the day she was sentenced. Her eyes found him immediately in the gallery, and for a moment, the entire room disappeared except for the two of them. She mouthed 3 words to him. "Thank you, already." He shook his head slightly. Not yet. The judge called the session to order, and the new lawyer, a sharp young woman the old man had helped them find through a legal aid organization, stood to present the case. She spoke clearly, methodically, laying out the timestamp discrepancy, the witness testimony, months of research condensed into a presentation the court could not easily dismiss. The prosecutor, a different one than before, listened with a tight jaw, occasionally scribbling notes, his confidence visibly less certain than the previous trials. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "the evidence clearly demonstrates that the timestamp used to place my client at the scene was altered after the fact. We have a witness who observed this alteration directly." The witness took the stand, hands shaking slightly, but her voice steady as she recounted what she'd seen. The prosecutor cross-examined sharply, trying to poke holes, but the timeline held, corroborated by records the boy and the old man had spent months tracking down. Still, the judge remained cautious, unconvinced entirely, requesting additional verification before making any ruling. The boy felt his chest tighten, watching the hesitation play out. Months of work, hanging in a delicate balance that could still tip the wrong way. It was during a brief recess, the courtroom murmuring with restless energy, that the doors at the back swung open. Every head turned. A man walked in, robes still draped over his shoulders from another courtroom entirely, expression composed, but eyes scanning the room with unmistakable urgency. The bailiff straightened immediately. Whispers rippled through the gallery. "Chief Justice," the presiding judge said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." The boy's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. Older now, lines around the eyes that hadn't been there in the few photographs his mother kept hidden away in a drawer, but unmistakably familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. His mother had gone completely still beside her lawyer, staring at the man now standing at the front of the courtroom. "I apologize for the interruption," the Chief Justice said, voice measured, though something beneath it trembled slightly. "I was made aware of the specifics of this case through a formal request for records review. I'd like to examine the evidence myself, if the court permits." The presiding judge, clearly caught off guard, but unwilling to refuse someone of such standing, nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." The Chief Justice approached the evidence table, lifting the timestamp document carefully, studying it with the same slow, careful attention the boy himself had learned to apply. Minutes passed in near silence, the entire courtroom holding its breath collectively. Then he looked up, eyes finding the boy in the gallery for the first time. Recognition passed between them, sharp and immediate, though neither said a word yet. The boy's hands curled into fists in his lap, a tangle of emotions he didn't have names for, rising in his chest all at once. "This timestamp," the Chief Justice finally said, addressing the court, "does not align with the original security log format used by this company during the relevant period. It was altered, poorly, but altered nonetheless." Murmurs spread through the gallery. The prosecutor's shoulders sank slightly. "I'd like this evidence formally reviewed by an independent forensic examiner before any final ruling," the Chief Justice continued. "Given the severity of what's being alleged, that a conviction may have rested on falsified evidence, this deserves the court's fullest diligence." The presiding judge nodded slowly. "Granted." The examination took 3 agonizing days, 3 days of waiting, of the boy barely sleeping, pacing the small apartment, while the old man tried, mostly unsuccessfully, to distract him with quiet conversation. 3 days of visits with his mother, both of them saying less than usual, simply holding on to each other's presence through the glass, bracing together for whatever was coming. On the 4th day, the courtroom reconvened, tighter with tension than before. The forensic examiner took the stand, methodical and unemotional, as she confirmed what the boy had discovered months earlier at a small desk under a single lamp. The timestamp had been deliberately altered. The original security footage placed his mother nowhere near the scene during the window in question. The presiding judge sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what had just been confirmed. Then he looked toward the defense table. "In light of this evidence," he said slowly, "the conviction against the defendant is hereby overturned. She is to be released immediately, and this matter will be referred for further investigation into how this evidence was falsified in the original trial." The sound that left his mother wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh. Something caught painfully between both. Relief finally allowed to exist out loud after nearly a year of being buried beneath composure she'd forced herself to maintain. The boy was out of his seat before he fully registered moving, crossing the small distance between them as she was released from the restraints she'd worn into the courtroom. She caught him in her arms so tightly he nearly lost his balance, both of them sinking slightly under the weight of finally being allowed to hold each other without glass between them. "You did this," she whispered against his hair, voice breaking completely now. "You actually did this. I told you I'd figure it out. You were 10 years old. You shouldn't have had to. I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because you're my mother." She pulled back just enough to look at him, cupping his face the way she used to when he was small, studying him like she was trying to memorize every detail of this exact moment. "I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world. I love you too, Mama. I never stopped believing you." Behind them, the courtroom slowly emptied, the celebration far too private and precious to be witnessed by strangers. But one figure remained, standing near the back, hands in his pockets, watching the two of them with an expression caught somewhere between pride and something closer to grief: the Chief Justice. His mother noticed him first, her arms still wrapped around her son, her expression shifting from pure joy into something more complicated, guarded. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly, not quite an accusation, but not entirely warm either. "I know," he said. "I should have come a long time before this.